Pessimism is yapping, and Yappuccino is not my cup of coffee. But there comes a time when you pay for Starbucks elephant shit to be your cup of coffee and you like it. Who doesn't like to justify their sadness by reducing it to determinism so that you can avoid responsibility and dare to conquering? Now, before you comment, oh, if you're going to talk about most pessimistic book, it must be Emil Cioran's or Mainlander's. To that I would say you'd be right that Philipp Mainländer is the most radically pessimistic one, but damn, no one translated his work yet, and as far as I know, he didn't write a novel. For the Emil Cioran part, that's where things get a little bit tricky. Pessimism is not identical to nihilism. Just think of ascetics for an example. They freaking hate themselves, not because they believe their life is meaningless, but because they believe their meaning in life in having to suffer for their sins. This is religious pessimism, and Mainlander too was religious and definitely ascetic. This is different than pessimism. In pessimism you can still believe that there is something positive out there, but that you cannot achieve it because you're pessimistic about it. But if you're cynic, you'll be believing that everything is sucks. Science sucks, religion sucks, reality sucks. You're not sad because you haven't lived a good life. There's no good life anyway. You're not pessimistic about it. You're cynically aware. That's why I will talk about Jean-Paul Sartre's nauseating novel, Nausea, instead, because it is indeed the most pessimistic novel ever written. Quote, I am alone in the midst of these happy, reasonable voices. All these creatures spend their time explaining, realizing happily that they agree with each other. In heaven's name, why is it so important to think the same things all together? I want to leave, to go somewhere where I should be really in my place, where I would fit in, but my place is nowhere. I am unwanted. This is pessimism. And in these quotes, you don't see features of misanthropy, cynic person. Rather, you see confused, alien, hopeless, insecure. This state is an excuse for the early philosophy of Sartre. Now, I won't go on explaining whole philosophy of Sartre. I would gladly do it, but I know your attention span is small. I will provide a quick, simplified summary. Being for itself, or pour soi in French, is a term used by Sartre to refer to the state of consciousness and the ability of individuals to make choices and act on their own volition. A man is for itself, for that he is conscious, but also yet to be defined and determined, because man lacks a predetermined essence that comes with the linear deterministic progression conditioned by nature. There's also bad faith, mauvaise foi. By refusing to acknowledge and accept our own freedom and agency, a person in bad faith is effectively surrendering their power to external forces, such as social norms or external expectations, but with one difference, that is, these expectations are their own, their comfort zone. Sartre gives an example of a waiter whose entire occupation is waiter-esque because he is in faith that this is the norm. This is the way he must act, for that he is a waiter. He aims to please the customers and his boss because in his expectation this is all he's automated to do. His whole essence is to be waiter, and there could never be any other way round whatsoever. This makes the waiter an object. In Sartre's terms, this refers to being in itself, which is objects and things that lack consciousness and are determined by their nature. A lame way to say being cursed by being a Medusa in a room full of mirrors. Lastly, there is being for others, which is being other-dependent, existing only by being ascribed by others. The autodidact is the personification of this, and it is through him that Sartre vilifies the humanism on which he would later base his existentialism. Sartre goes on explaining his philosophy on this topic in his book Being and Nothingness, but I just want to give an example of the confusingness of the pessimistic side in this philosophy with the book Nausea, as he's depicting why his early philosophy is flawed and self-defeating most beautifully in his novel. Roquentin, the protagonist of the novel, forces himself to be being in itself. What's intriguing is that he's almost purely inhuman, for the fact that his bad faith is simply pessimism, indicating there is nothing worthwhile to conditioned over. We could fill first part of Roquentin's life by replacing him with a programmable typewriter, a computer, a slot, a decor, and nothing much would have changed. The authenticity and freedom that Sartre speaks of is absent in Roquentin. Roquentin's self-objectification isn't his existential choice, it is his existence. He's in a pessimism that he is stuck with his rejections. Pessimism is pregnant with destroying concepts and criticizing these old concepts as a barrier against the new, the authentic, a program that uses a predetermined sequence of thoughts and actions does not contain a thinking creature in it. Roquentin is not a thinking creature, rather a tool that is repeated and dragged around in a single suicide method. Sartre tries to establish ideal onto him, but Roquentin is unable to have it. Sartre uses Roquentin's authentic persona of not being in bad faith and not acting as someone he is not in a way that knows what he is not, even if he doesn't know what he is, to satirize bad faith. But Roquentin, in his authenticity, is just miserable. Roquentin wants to live his adventure in a novel, transcending the enigma of life in the veil of storytelling. The thing is, though, life has neither beginning nor end. People change, names change, places change, concepts change. But the function of life, the chaos of its uncertainty, the instincts of the individual does not change. Tomorrow cannot be a continuation of today because such a claim requires a change of life. Today's continuation is the story. When you place your repetitive walk in the middle of the day on the first page of a novel, it becomes a prelude. Roquentin doesn't believe in tomorrow, but he can't tell stories either. He has no prelude, he has no epilogue. He only has an ideologue, Sartre, that created him in one of his mescaline trips. He's a crab. The crab in the middle of the beach that made the kids laugh. The crab crushed under the stone he was trying to throw into the sea. Humanity is nauseous to him because he is nauseous to himself. Only human beings have the hypocrisy of self-love in others and perceive it as mutual love. By not loving himself, Roquentin doesn't love others either. When Annie broke up with him, he felt nothing. He is nothing. His depersonalization showed him as a transparent object to himself and ascribed it to others. When he met Annie again and lost her again, he felt nothing. He did what he felt necessary, like a robot fulfilling its task. And when he realized that he had lost her again, it made no difference to him. He sees a white hole in the wall, a mirror. It is a trap. I know I am going to let myself be caught in it. I have. He haven't. He gets caught in the wall surrounding the white hole. He sees his ideal in the mirror, but the ideal is foggy, gray, nauseated. He can't see. He tries to explain himself by how others know him. He interprets himself as the window frame of the other's imaginary. He gets happy when he sees his hair, which indicates a color and can be made in a class judgment. But when he sees his nose and lips, he cannot add an individual meaning to it by himself. The ideal triggers him. Closer he gets to ideal, more he denies. He pushes his ideal back. He paints a forged picture, thinking of his ideal that how will blend into his humanity. He beats himself. There is nothing new. The growing ideal in the mirror now triggers him even more. Anything can happen. Sometimes, my heart pounding, I made a sudden right-about turn. What was happening behind my back? Maybe it would start behind me, and when I would turn around, suddenly, it would be too late. My eyes went rapidly from one to the other, to catch them unawares, stop them in the midst of their metamorphosis. The white pages of the papers brought him so close to the present himself, and the future that he could not find, or the present in the others he described throughout the book. He looked around. There was nothing but present. A table, a bed, a mirror cabinet in me. He searched for his past. He had no past. He's an item. Things are entirely what they appear to be, and behind them there is nothing. He wanted to rebel, but he did not dare. Not now. Above all, not move, not move. He's waiting to be wrong, but in the end, the essence wins out. Looking at his nose and tongue, which he could not understand before, he says, "This is me." Existence, liberated, detached, floods over me. I exist. The crab is dead. He achieves its ideal, but not in its existence, but in its denial of its existence. Roquentin is not in life, but around life. He unconsciously takes the ideal he denies into the focus of his life, because denial cannot be dealt with independently of the denied. This denial makes him being for itself. However, the biggest mistake of philosophers is to believe that they can fit individuals into a whole, an ideal concept. And Sartre admits that this is a mistake through the ideal of Roquentin. There is no difference between the rote intellectuality of the autodidact and the intellectual constrained by a fanatical pessimism, or the romanticism-induced intellectual as a revolt of adherence to tradition and the role of masculinity. All of them are blind, all hiding in concepts: pessimist, socialist, existentialist, being in itself, being for itself. It is what it is. It is what it is not. An indefinable, irreducible unique would have been assertive individual who is fully in control control of their own life and is not defined or determined by external forces or ideas. In Max Stirner's book, The Unique and Its Property, he makes a definition of the unique as something that has no content with anything, as it is merely a label like a name, Max. It doesn't give away anything about its property. It doesn't give any definition, but just labels what Max is through the experiences of Max. We can label as Max someone whose death from a fly caused no resonance. But this label doesn't define Max. Max was Max before he died of a fly infection. And when he published his manifesto, there were no traces of someone dying of a fly infection. This is not an authentic characteristic that can define Max. It is just a randomness on Max's part. In life, which does not proceed in a linear flow anyway, one's death cannot be the ultimate defining characteristic, or even the missing piece of the puzzle. Death explains nothing. What did Dostoevsky's death tell us about his life? Maybe that he was a human being, but he is no longer a human being, and he is still Dostoevsky. So being a human being is not a defining characteristic of Dostoevsky. Nor can we define Dostoevsky by his works, because he was Dostoevsky before he created them. According to Max Stirner, the unique is nothing, but this nothingness is freeing and creative. Since there's nothing I'm entitled to nor excluded from, anything is my property. I can do anything I want, since any outcome is presuppositions I construct in my mind that I can take as truth or fake. In Sartre's terminology, unique and its proportion, nothingness, are synonymous with being in itself, but Sartre's nothingness is limiting and prejudiced. Stirner's uniqueness is not to serve the instructions of the ego, but to show his ownness without showing devotion to all properties, including the ego. Sartre's being in itself, however, in its embodiment in Roquentin, consists in interpreting its ownness into its destruction by becoming pessimistic about what he fails to possess in the service of the ego. Roquentin, with his pre-essential existence, is an exemplary of how existence precedes essence through a pessimistic essence, but Sartre interprets this thought, which he inherited from Heidegger, egocentrically, yet in a way that betrays one's selfishness in ownness. Heidegger said that the quote-unquote essence of Dasein lies in its existence. Sartre took this as if the existence of man was a blank state tabula rasa in the first place, as if we were creating essence afterwards. He used the subjectivity of individuals to rationalize this thought, but couldn't rationalize it enough. Apparently, existence, devoid of essence, is a seat that will never be a dead donkey. Firstly, a seat doesn't even look like a donkey in any way. Have some imagination. Secondly, if we're going to take refuge in his subjectivity, there's nothing we can discuss. After this point, it's just fallacy. Thirdly, if Sartre is rooting in Heidegger's Dasein, his understanding of it is completely wrong. That kind of being towards which Dasein can comport itself in one way or another, and always does comport itself somehow, we call existence. And because we cannot define Dasein's essence by citing a what of the kind that pertains to a subject matter, and because its essence lies rather in the fact that in each case it has its being to be, and has it as its own, we have chosen to designate this entity as Dasein, a term which is purely an expression of its being. Existence, thought in terms of ecstasis, does not coincide with existentia in either form or content. In terms of content, existence means standing out into the truth of being. Existentia means in contrast actualitas, actuality, as opposed to mere possibility as idea. Existence identifies the determination of what man is in the destiny of truth. Existentia is the name for the realization of something that is as it appears in its idea. The sentence, man exists, is not an answer to the question of whether man actually is or not. Rather, it responds to the question concerning man's essence. Sartre's key proposition about the priority of existentia over essentia does, however, justify using the name existentialism as an appropriate title for a philosophy of this sort. The basic tenet of existentialism has nothing at all in common with the statement from being in time, apart from the fact that in being in time, no statement about the relation of essentia and existentia can yet be expressed, since there it is still a question of preparing something precursory. Fourthly, Sartre's compulsive freedom is inexplicably the opposite of what all the freedom definitions potentially can be. Trying to rationalize his concept of freedom with subjectivity is like a murderer saying he's reviving the deceased he killed. No, he just killed him. And no, this is not freedom. Saying that individuals are driven by a sense of obligation or duty to make choices that reflect their values and principles is a form of external constraint that limits the individual's true freedom. And Sartre constrains this concept with his dogmas. He limits subjectivism to his subjectivism and objectivism to his objectivism. And in the work, Sartre is maybe knowingly or unknowingly unable to competent to construct someone else's consciousness in this story. Every character is Roquentin, and the pessimistic flavor of this solipsism is the fact that Roquentin is literally no one. We're lucky Sartre himself abandoned this work of his. In an interview, Sartre makes this confession. In the beginning, my works did not have a political side. Even my works were not even related to humanism. But then the circumstances pushed me to be involved in the French resistance. I had to take my first political position here. As a continuation of this position, I held a conference in 1945 titled Existentialism is a Humanism, which disappointed a very large part of those who read my book of Nausea. This conference was bad, but that was not what really hurt the readers. What hurt them was my betrayal of the anti-humanism in Nausea by taking one engaged stance after another. What I saw as progress was for them to go back on what you said. Existential philosophy is wholly conceptual masturbation, and many of them seem to have arisen out of philosophies that the West romanticized as reductions of Buddhism, or out of the need to create an echo chamber or ego gratification through obscurantism. It is fair to say the person who progresses in existential philosophy, especially Sartre's, eventually will accept the freedom of being a vagabond like in the movie, sans toit nihiloi, or abandon this philosophy altogether, because existentialism does not offer a practical and pragmatic meaning for laymen. Camus did better job as absurdism offer meaninglessness, and is the peak of meaninglessness only vagabond. But I believe the key word is a middle road between loneliness and freedom.